right. Hello to everybody that is joining us for another wonderful Friday night with the Coach's Corner. How is everybody doing?
Excellent. Good to see you as
Good.
always.
Hey, hey.
For everybody that's tuning in, I'm just going to say a couple words to get us started and disappear. So feel free to ask questions. Just drop them in the chat box. I believe we have somebody that will be answering them in chat. But if you have specific questions, I can also pass them over to everybody that is live with us tonight. We hopefully will be able to get to everything, but if not, feel free to reach out to our wonderful coaches at the Coach's Corner. So that being said, I am going to disappear and I'm going to pass this off to your grace, Duke Sean.
Thank you, ma'am, as always. Greetings, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for the Coach's Corner. Tonight is an episode on a kind of ongoing series we're doing. We're doing kind of a three-part series on kind of the what makes a good coach, and the roles that we have, and kind of want to make it clear that when we talk about being a coach or a trainer, or a teacher, we'd covered some of that last week, and everybody on some level is going to be a teacher. The role of being a coach or a trainer is a little more evolved, and somewhat nuanced, I guess, but everybody should be expected to share their knowledge to some degree or another, and you don't have to be quote unquote qualified to take on one of those roles. In reference to another conversation that we were having recently, sometimes people decide that you're going to be their coach and their trainer, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to accept that role. And sometimes it's unavoidable. And they say, well, you help me with this stuff, so you're my coach. And that can be that can be awkward. It can be awesome. But everybody should consider themselves a teacher to some degree. And so we're talking about what makes a coach, what makes a trainer, what makes a teacher, those roles. And some of what we're going to talk about tonight, in the good and the bad, the ugly of that, is when you get information thrown at you like you're drinking from a fire hose, what are you going to do with all that information, and how do you know what of that is applicable and what you're supposed to follow, and what's what is actually going to be the most benefit for your fighting, to begin with. And to sum up the gist of it, when we're talking about the good, generally that's going to be what are the things that are going to be the best benefit to your fighting. We're talking about the bad. There is bad information out there. We talk a lot about the idea that there's I don't believe in the one true way. I don't believe that there's any one right way to do this, but there's a lot of bad ways to do this, and we need to kind of differentiate what those are. And some of those bad things are going to be things that are going to either injure you or delay your fighting progress. And then the ugly basically comes down to things that coaches, trainers, teachers may do that are going to drive you away, are going to want to make you not want to be part of this. So that's kind of the context that we're looking at. And tonight I'm joined by His Grace Duke Eliahu from the Mid-Realm, Viscount Sir Sagan, and Sir Octamasades. Eli, do you want to maybe kick us off with some of the good?
Well, I related to the issue of helping a student who's getting a lot of information, say from other people. If I'm someone's the teacher, trainer, coach of my student, and they are getting a fire hose full of information from other people, say at some event that's set up for training. There's events like that in the Mid-Realm where all the knights go and they hold classes and they spar with and work with a lot of people, and there's a lot of information thrown at them. And so what I've told my squires is, when you're getting that, take it all in, listen to it all, but write it down, take notes, have a notebook and take notes on it all. And then come to me and let me help you interpret that, figure out what that means, pull out the pieces that you need now and can work with now, correlate the pieces that actually are the same thing said in different ways, and help you understand them and integrate them into the level of training you're at now so that you can use that. And then go further with that and take notes, continue to take notes on what you do and your progress. And so I remember one squire who, who's since been knighted, who kept a training journal. Every practice, everything he learned, every new thing he learned, and he kept a training journal. It was very valuable to him in doing that. So that's one way of dealing with that I direct my students to deal with that fire hose of information. But the flip side of that is, as an instructor, or however you are interacting with a student, presenting information to them, a lot depends on the setting. Are you working with them repeatedly? Is this a one-time thing? You're seeing them and they've asked for help. Don't give them too much information. Limit it to one thing, two things, at most three, that you can very clearly explain to them in the time you have. So that, and then get them to repeat them to you so that they understand. And I encourage them tonight and write it down. So when I've been at some training events, I bring a lot of cheap little notebooks and pencils that I get at like a dollar store, where you can get a box of them for a couple of bucks. And then I will, if they don't have something to write down, I'll give it to them and say, I want you to write this down. And there's another technique that if I go through a very extensive bit of information with someone, I go through, repeat it to get them to understand it. And then I reduce that to a single word or short phrase mnemonic, so that when we move on to something else and they start to lose that first skill, I can say that and it keys in that previous information. So instead of having to go through it all again. So those are a couple techniques. So that's some of the good in as a student and as a teacher interacting with student for how to manage the volume of information that they're getting.
So Octa, how do we as students, how can we self-identify what is going to work for us and what's not going to work?
Well, I think a lot of that is the communication, and it varies between if you're a new student and you're just starting out, or you've been doing this for a while and you're coming to a class maybe to pick up information. I would come with sort of a plan, understand what's going to be thrown at you, and I like the idea of a training being a bit of that lecture and teaching, where you're describing a technique, say you're working on a flat snap or some footwork, and then allow the student to experience it while you're there working with them, so you can help them feel what they're doing. You can actually manipulate the exchange between the two of you to elicit more of a response you want, and get them to understand it, work with their body type, kind of feel where they have hitches. You can ask them questions about why they're doing things a certain way if it's not quite jiving. And I really like that sort of hands-on approach, being able to work with somebody and have them feel what they're doing. As long with journaling, if they can feel a technique, they can recreate the technique.
Yeah. And Sagan, it's really handy if you have a coach or a trainer, but somebody starting off day one who's just coming to this. How can you tell?
How you knew where I was headed?
How can you tell who's full of shit?
When we start talking about coach, I'm going to refer to it as TCT, teacher, coach, trainer. When we start talking about that, it's from a student trainee point of view is be extremely aware of your level. Where are you at in fighting? How much experience do you have? And this will help you set realistic expectations of the relationship between you and your TCT. Okay. So it's one of those things where you're not going to learn it all in a day. I'll guarantee that. But when you do work with a TCT, mine the nuggets that are applicable to you where you are in your training. That's very important. My brothers have already mentioned journaling, and I would add to that, if the TCT will allow video,
Yeah.
please take rent one, borrow one, buy one, take that with you, because when you're in the really good side, the TCT is going to offer up, as Octa mentioned, they're going to offer up not just verbal, they're going to offer up physical. So they're going to talk about it, and then they're going to show you. And if you capture it on video, then you can look at it again and again and again. If you try and journal it, the caution there is you may miss something. And so what's there is incomplete, and you may not even journal it because, I can't write all that down. So I would reiterate what His Grace said and what Sir Octa said, where absolute two-way communication is something that you're looking for in a TCT on the good side, right? That TCT is looking to educate and serve each one of the student trainees, right? And it's one of those things where sometimes that doesn't happen. We'll go into that when we start talking about some of the bad stuff. Some of the other stuff that I wrote down is that so you approach this from being a brand new fighter, you go to a TCT presentation of some sort, or you ask someone at practice to show you something. It is with a caution that you need to be the good student trainee. If you ask them point blank, show me that, and they do, prepare yourself to ask them questions like, should I do it against a left-hander? Should I do it against a pole arm? Are there setup movements that makes that more successful? And what type of fighter should I never do it against? So you're being a two-way communicator with them, but you're also looking for the knowledge of your level and the cautionary tale of, do not just take this, walk out onto the field and try it. You've gotten some information now, and you know for a fact, okay, I did ask a lot of questions, and you're ready to start. And again, as a novice beginner fighter, let's say anybody under a year, there are a lot of times where people are going to offer you quite a bit of information, and I would think the majority of it is well intended, but you will be in this spot where you have to determine, is it good or bad for me? And then that's the way we'll press forward.
And I think to speak to what you were talking about with that communication, I think it's really important as students, when you're going for that kind of feedback or training and somebody's talking with you, that you're super honest about your level and your experience. Trying to seem more advanced than you are is only going to slow down your progress and your ability to train.
I think things to look for as a student is that your teacher should be able to explain, not just show it to you, but explain why it's worth doing in this way as opposed to what you're doing. They should be able to give you reasons for it, and then and show you how to do it. And for kinesthetic learning, which is what we're talking about, I recommend that teachers show a student how to do it until they can do it correctly, then have them do it wrong, or the way they were doing it, and then have them do it right again so they can feel the difference. Sometimes I'll have students close their eyes so it eliminates the distraction of what they're seeing, so they're focused just on the how it feels, so that they can then feel it, because I know that if you've been fighting a long time, you should be able to drop into guard just and know it feels by how it feels, like kinesthetic feedback. So haptic, never mind. But I recommend that students look for teachers who can give them the explanation and the reasons for it, as well as just showing them how to do it.
You're muted, Sean.
Of course I am. I think one of the things about finding the good for you is, especially as a new fighter, you know, don't make any assumptions about, you know, that this is the one person that's going to be my trainer. In the beginning, I definitely recommend you seek out as much as you can. I mean, I always do anyway, but eventually you're going to kind of settle into having that primary trainer, and that, you know, somebody maybe you're in fealty with and become a squire to or what have you, that is going to be your primary TCT. But in the beginning, when you're first getting to practice and you're trying to find out what's going on, you know, there are a lot of especially if you're in a barony like ours, or up in Stromgard where Octa is, or, you know, up in Roaring Waste where Branos and Ronvald are. You've got lots of options, you know, lots of people that can potentially become one of your primary trainers. But in the beginning, you know, try to listen to everybody, and don't try to get too sucked into, you know, it's got to be this one person. And the good of a relationship, and the training you're going to get comes from, you know, I mean, basically what makes sense to you. You know, who is going to provide you the information in a way that your brain needs to hear it. Who is going to be able to communicate with you in ways that what they're saying makes sense to you. If you're constantly struggling to have somebody explain things and they're just not getting through to you for whatever reason, and that could be either the way that they're teaching it or the way that you hear it, and you know, neither one of those is a, you know, an individual fault. There's just communication breakdown. Sometimes you just don't get through to somebody. That's not your trainer. And that doesn't mean what they're saying is wrong necessarily. That's just saying that, you know, they're not able to get it to you in a way that makes sense to you. And that's, you know, that's one of the key things we're looking for is, you know, finding people that can talk to you in ways that where you feel successful, where you feel like you're making progress in your endeavor, and that it is something that you can comprehend and you can go on and work on, instead of just kind of doing things by rote, you know, because I'm just doing this just because they said. And, you know, there's some of that where it said, this is when I tell you how to do Pell work and this is the way you do Pell work. Well, maybe that's the way you do it, but that's just instead of just, but yeah. So you're just looking for somebody that communicates well with you in a way that you comprehend, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to be in a hurry. If you're new to fighting or you've been fighting a year or so, take your time to learn yourself. Learn what you're interested in, find things that you like. And just because somebody's a fantastic fighter, they're going to be a great fighter friend. You might learn some stuff from them, but they might not be your primary trainer, coach, because you guys might not communicate the same way or learn the same way.
All right. So some of the bad. So this is for me, most of the stuff that out there, you know, again, there's not one right way to do it, but there are a lot of bad ways to do it. And, you know, I know that the stick mechanics that I teach are designed very specifically to be kind to your body. And I think that is the crux of things to me that come up as bad, are things that are going to be detrimental to your long-term success in this sport. You know, you hear all kinds of stories about people who, came up with some magic shot when they were in their 20s and, won a bunch of crowns with those. And now they can't, now they can't fully extend their arm because they jack themselves up. And, that's good for short-term success, but things that are going to do long-term damage to your body, those are the things that are the bad that we really want to stay away from. So Octa, you want to cover some of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we've talked about it. Some of the bad is you go to a practice and there aren't a lot of teachers and trainers, and it's trial by fire. You get thrown into the crucible, and you learn by doing, and you learn by getting hit, and that's just not a good. A lot of people end their sport right there. They get hurt, or they try and throw too hard, too fast, blow a shoulder, start fighting left-handed, blow that shoulder, and now they can't fight anymore. Or their tools or armor, they get set up with stuff that their armor hurts them more than their opponent, or they're fighting with a sword that's the wrong size, shape, or weight for their body, and they aren't learning proper technique to throw it. And like Sean said, you blowing elbows, and your longevity in the sport goes away really fast. For what we do, there's a lot of demand on our bodies, and if you're not keeping up with the physicality of it and the technique to avoid damage, I've seen more potentially great fighters walk away from the SCA because of the first 3 years of their fighting.
And I think that actually suggests that a situation where a new fighter is treated the same as everyone else instead of as an individual, where their individual physicality and their mental approach and their emotional approach and their is ignored, and they're just, here's the armor, here's what you do, here's how you stand, here's what you, and it's just the same for everyone. And I think everyone's not the same, and that kind of factory of trying to produce a mass of fighters says sometimes more about the ego of the person in charge of that than it does about doing it for the students. And so I'd say that's another thing to watch out for. I think a lot of us have the experience of starting out, and teaching consisted of putting you in armor and hitting you until you figured out how not to get hit. And that's another indication of bad, because there's still places that do that. And sometimes they say, well, we want people to have fun, so we put them in armor and get them to have fun, so that they see it's fun and they'll continue with it. But there's a difference between putting somebody in armor and letting them have fun and putting them in armor to beat the crap out of them. And there are people who I will not let fight brand new fighters because they don't have a level of control to be able to work with somebody who's brand new. They're during authorizations, there are people I won't let fight an authorization against a new person because they're doing it to show off. Well, it's showing off by beating up somebody who doesn't know what they're doing is wrong. It's not showing off, it's showing off badly. So that's another thing as a student to watch for. People who are, it's more about them than it is about you as a student.
There you go. There you go. And it's one of those things. So the partnership, the relationship between the TCT and the student trainee is imperative, right? You need to understand, is this person willing to partnership with me, or are they just going to talk to me and that's it? They're done. They may not even show me how to do this. So from the bad side of, don't make any assumptions. Don't assume that everybody at practice wants to help you, because many of them don't. That's the way of the world. We accept that. On your side, though, again, make sure you're the good student trainee. You have questions prepared. You have recognized the level of your current fighting, and you will make sure in that two-way communication that you explain that so there's no misunderstandings. sometimes even offering up. I've been in armor X times. I've actually fought at full speed Y times. I'm fairly physically fit. However, I do have a gimpy right elbow. You know, anything you can offer up. His Grace Eliahu is correct. Sometimes when somebody walks out onto the practice field in front of another fighter, there's no questions asked. And all of a sudden everything goes to a 10 because they're practicing. So you want to make sure that you communicate to them, to that other fighter, hey, by the way, you know, I'm a beginner. And, you know, so I would like you to keep that in mind. So on the other thing from the TCT side of you, and again, this is in my humble opinion, if you hear the words, this is the only way to do this, or, oops, sorry, or anybody can do this, or I only teach this one way, those should be cautions right there for you to take into consideration as far as going forward and working with this individual. So there, as we've said before, there is no one way to fight. There is no one way to train. There is no one way to teach. There is no one way to learn. And that two-way communication is imperative to try and fit the TCT to the student trainee. And it's your job as well not to assume, as His Grace Sean said, don't assume anything, right? Don't assume that this person wants to train you. Don't assume that this person is willing to train you or that they have the capabilities to train you. So once again, we're back to be the good student trainee.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up a question that we'd had offline. The Bronos had mentioned had come up along this topic, and it was basically, you know, what happens when someone tells you that you can't do a technique or fight in a certain way when other knights and trainers are teaching you that way at practice. So when you have, you know, you've gotten some instruction from somebody, maybe it's working for you, maybe it's not, and then you have somebody else comes along and says, oh, don't do that, that's just nonsense. So, you know, how do we deal with that? How does the student deal with that when you're getting conflicting information from so-called experts, right?
There you go. There you go. It is one of those things, and Sean, you and I have talked about this before. Between the TCT student trainee relationship, the lion's share of the work is done by the trainee student, okay? When you hear things like this, you take it in and you, again, everything that you hear or shown, you have to weigh in a couple of ways. Is it applicable to me? Yes or no, right? What do I want to do with the information I just received? And maybe in this instance, you say, okay, I don't think the two-way communication may work in this. So I will go on and I will investigate and do some more research before I make my decision as to whether or not it's applicable for me.
Well,
Yep.
you get those techniques, right? Let's just call it a technique. And I would say that's the how, right? You're learning, somebody's teaching you a how that conflicts with somebody else's how. So the next
Right.
question is why? Why are you throwing it this way? And why does this person do it this way? You might find out that one person does it a certain way because that's the only way their body works. Or
Right.
you might dig deeper and find out, hey, they got the goofy foot, they got sword foot forward when they're throwing that technique, and the other person's got their shield leg forward. It could just be a small little thing, and now it's become, instead of a conflict, it's just a different style of approach.
Right. And you may have to ask when and when not. When should I do this? When should I never do this?
Exactly.
Well, that may very well be a case too, where when somebody says you can't do this, it's because I can't do this.
Yeah.
Could be. It could
And
be.
you know, if I can't do this, then you can't do this, and you know, because it can't be done, and that's clearly not the case.
And that's what you just said, Duke Sean. It does go back to the I only teach this one way, right? And you're not to do this. Oh, Okay.
Yeah. I think for me, it's definitely one of those things where, and it is difficult to discern in the beginning when you should call BS. I mean, because you come to practice and you want to get better and you want to be the dutiful student, and that's part of that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation and do this episode specifically is, how does Joe Blow newbie fighter, who is somewhat dependent on the information they're getting from the chivalry, from the experts, from the people that have been doing this longer, how do you tell what to listen to and what don't and what not to listen to? And I guess my take on that is take, like you said, take it all in, listen to all of it, and you watch you watch the fighters that are around you, and you look at how some of them fight. Maybe you might even look at how successful they are, but I don't think that's really a good measure. You look at how somebody fights, and decide which of those fighters you want to emulate, and which one, which of those you kind of want to be more like, and you're more likely to go with those. As you are trying to find a TCT, you just ask around, soak it all in, and when you're looking around, I would be cautious of somebody that says that, if you're going to train with me, you only train with me. Because be cautious of somebody who is going to tell you that this is the one and only way to do things, that this is the one true way. Really be cautious of that sort of thing, because that may be the one true way for them, but that may not be the one true way for you. Because when we talk about fighting style is very, very individual, very specific, very personal. And I think I would generally say that you're much better off following a trainer that is going to encourage you to, as Eli said earlier, go out into the world, get all the information you can, write it down in a book, then you come back to me and we will discuss what works, what can fit within your fighting style, which is going to be heavily influenced by previous martial arts background, athletic background, military background. It's like, and that's, as a coach and a trainer, that is our job, to say, you got all this information, all these different people told you different ways to do things, so let's try to find the one that fits best with who you are as a fighter. And but yeah, go out there and find it, but really be cautious of somebody who's just going to say, that this is the one true way.
And that same type of trainer or teacher will often also have an ego issue if you start to evolve past them. And sometimes people can have a really hard time with somebody that they view as a student excelling past their own abilities. And frankly, some teachers have a hard time learning from their students. I find I get some of the best nuggets of information through teaching new people and being open to their questions and trying to come up with answers. And I get the opportunity to evolve. So that's kind of the good and the bad. Finding somebody that's willing to listen and learn from you as well as teach you is a great asset.
I'd like to just dissect two terms here: style and system.
Here we
because people will emulate without understanding, and they will emulate elements of style without understanding how each part of what someone does fits into the system they use for fighting. And emulation without understanding, imitation without understanding, is not going to be successful. So I think another thing to look for in a TCT is, do they have a system? In other words, does each part of what they teach fit and influence every other part? How you stand, how your equipment is, how you move, how you think about the fight, all of that works together. And I know I've seen, I'm working with I remember this particular incident of I was at an event and a fighter asked to work with me, and I told him to take his guard, and he had a very weird stance. I said, well, hang on, before we do anything, let me get your stance balanced and all that. And when I did that, the ocularum, the eye slot, was up here, and he couldn't see through it. So he tilted his head so he could see through it, which caused him to shift his hips forward, so it threw everything off. I said, well, before we do anything else, here's the problem. And so somebody put him in armor without regard for him. And it was a style of equipment that people had used or made, or he could borrow, but it wasn't a system. It didn't all work together. So I think as a student, you should look for a system. It should, every piece should fit with and work with every other piece.
Mhm.
So, and if you learn a system, any system, and there's several systems, many systems, then you can incorporate skills from other systems into your system. But if you're emulating style elements, you can't do that so easily.
True.
Yeah, there was a comment that I wanted to address in that came up. Duke Hogarden in the comments, it mentioned always file it away in your head. It may show up at a later plateau, and that's one of the things to kind of note or caution too about bad in that something that you cannot incorporate right now is not necessarily bad information. Everything is built on foundations. Everything is built on the step before. One of the things that I noticed years ago that happens particularly with new knights, new members of the chivalry, is they're super excited about teaching people and about sharing what they're doing, and they don't really have an understanding of the student that they're working with may or may not be prepared for what is next. And what I've seen is you get somebody who's freshly knighted and they have this thing that they felt like was got them over the hump, right? And finally got them to the part where they really understood our sport and could be recognized. And that was the last piece that they had to have. And so they're just super excited to give that piece to somebody else and say, oh, you should be doing this because that's what got me knighted, right? And that's what got me over the hump, right? Without realizing that the student that you're working with can't comprehend what it took you how many years as a squire for you to finally, right before you got knighted, like comprehend. Like there's so much of what's going on, and as trainers, we kind of have to evaluate that, and as Sagan was saying earlier, and we start asking those questions: how long have you been fighting? How frequently have you been fighting? Those sort of things, and how many times have you fought in the last year, right? I have a baseline measurement for basically fighting once a week. It's like, when was the last time you fought 52 times in a 1 year period? When was the last time you fought on average once a week, right? Because that gives us an idea about how, like, where you are in your training. But being able to kind of back off on that. Like, don't try to fix all their problems right now just because that was the one thing that you figured out. You have to figure out like where they're at. And so when we're looking at bad information, it's like, it's not bad information. You're just not ready for it. And that's okay. Let's try to find what will work for you, establish those foundations. And as the comment says, put it away in the back of your head. Right. And a lot of times when we do, like, we like talking about fighting. Okay. I mean, we like talking about it, and we really want to help people. And sometimes we're going to throw just a ton of information at you, and you are going to be drinking like from a fire hose. We're not expecting you to take all of that and make something of it. But what you're going to get is at the end of what we give with you, typically we're going to do, as Eli said, these are your 3 things to consider when you go home back to practice and you're doing your training. These are the three primary things you're going to do. All the other information that we give you is context. And one day you're going to be working on these three things that we gave you. They're going to suddenly make sense. And you're going to go, wait a minute, that's the context for this. That's the explanation. That's where it goes on to this. And then you're going to find that leads you to another thing.
Right, right. And the other thing, you know, your Grace has cautioned about, you know, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it isn't correct. The other caution to that is just because you don't understand it, you don't go to somebody else and say something like, this TCT, you know, they're doing stuff, they told me that there's only one way to do it. And I think that you know who is just full of you know what. No, no, no. No. Again, no preconceived ideas about right or wrong. You can go to someone else and ask them, you know, and it doesn't have to be a TCT. It could be another fighter you know real well and say, hey, you know, I heard about this. What do you think about that statement? And have you know, get some more information. Again, we talked about going and doing more research, going, you know, that's part of it. Ask other people. And if the majority of the answers are, oh, that's correct, yeah, you shouldn't do that, then there's some basis in fact for what you were told. And if there isn't, then you receive new information to make your judgment on this to go forward with.
I think one thing that teachers, anyone who's teaching anything, should expect is that you will work with a student and you'll show them something, you'll explain it, and you work with them and they won't get it. And then sometime later, they'll come back to you and say, hey, so-and-so showed me this thing, isn't it cool? And it's the thing you've been showing them and trying to teach them for a year that they finally got because somebody else showed them in a different way or different context, or they were just ready to hear it at that time. So I think that's one thing that you should be prepared for.
And huzzah, the student trainee got the information they needed.
Yep.
Doesn't matter from whom, but they got it, and now they've enjoyed some success.
Yeah,
exactly.
I've had plenty of that where I've had someone, you know, one of my squires come up to me, you know, and say, oh, well, I was just talking to so-and-so about this thing. And, you know, it was quite frankly, you know, somebody who I didn't have a tremendous amount of respect for as a trainer. But when my squire said, hey, this guy said this thing, and it makes sense to me, I can say, oh, I've been trying to tell you that for 6 months. But if that's the person who said it in a way that gets through to you and in a way that your brain understands it, I don't care where it comes from. I may think he's full of crap about a lot of stuff, but when you come back to me and say, hey, this guy showed me this thing, I got no problem saying, yeah, that's absolutely right. And do that. Do what that person was saying, because, you know, as trainers, we cannot have any ego about that, because we have to know that sometimes you're just not going to get through to somebody on, I mean, it doesn't matter how good a trainer you are.
Right.
Sometimes you just don't have the terminology. Sometimes
it's not just the way you're trying to say it doesn't fit, but they're not ready to hear it as well. So and that's really, really hard to know. It's really hard to know if someone's ready. They may think they're ready, but they're just not getting it. You try another way of explaining it. Eventually they hear it in a different way, but at a time they're ready to hear it. So it's, you know, I recommend I've given all my squires a copy of the Book of Five Rings and said, read this once every 5 years, and it will mean something different to you every time you read it, because your level of understanding and ability to understand it and your experience will be different, and you'll comprehend it in a different way.
I have a series of books like that, and my good friend Helgi just added another one to it that's blowing my mind right now. So yeah, you might only get one Book of Martial Power. It's got a lot of great stuff in there. but you might only get, I tell people when we're going through classes, especially like at an event like Sport of Kings, where you want to talk fire hose, you got a bundle of fire
Oh,
hoses
yeah.
strapped together, tied to the back of a semi truck full of water, and you get a lot of stuff. And if you pick up 1 or 2% from every class, but you're taking notes, you go back and you chew on that for a year or through your practices and start applying things. And then boom, just like the book, you'll go, hey, I remember reading something. You go over here, you reread this book, and then that triggers you to go back to this class notes and, oh, I picked this up. And you go talk to this person and they go, uh-huh, and then you move on to your next thing. So part of the good is just sometimes that knowledge, like everybody said, doesn't make sense, doesn't fit the current pyramid of knowledge you have, but it'll
Well,
come.
and that's a really important point as a learner, is looking for those connections between different points of information and bringing that all together in ways that are interrelated, ways that you can understand. And that's active learning. And learning is not a passive reception of information, just as teaching is not a one-way transmission of information. It's a conversation, it's an interactive process. And learners have to be as active as their instructors do. And so as a learner, one of the best things you can do is, hey, connect those different things in ways that are meaningful to you. And that takes work.
Just
Yeah,
exciting.
and a lot of what you guys are talking about there is, when I do my fighting clinic, and I'm sure Sagan is very much the same way when he does his clinic. Um, my fighting clinic starts with 2 hour lecture before we put on armor at all, and that lecture, the first part of it is training methodology and how you learn a thing, and the second part is basically the 5 on each side that Sagan teaches. And that lecture for me has been the same for like 12, 13 years. Everywhere I go, it is exactly the same. And the reason for that is either you haven't heard it before at all, which is often the case, or if you have heard it and you have been to my class several times, every time you hear it, you're going to hear a new piece of it. Not because I didn't say it before, but because you weren't ready for it before. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. One of the, as a trainer, it turns out a lot of unbelted fighters have pretty much the same problems. And so we spend a lot of our time saying the same things over and over again. And you would think that would get old, and you would think that it gets boring, except for the fact that while we are saying this for the 1000th plus time, we understand that we are saying it to this individual and they're hearing it for the first time. And it will blow their mind. And it always cracks me up how people have not been introduced to some of these basic concepts. I don't mind saying it over and over again, because I understand you're hearing it for the first time, and when you hear it, it is going to make a profound difference in what you're doing. So don't ever think that we're not there for it. But I will say it to an extent. I will say it as many times as necessary to get through to you. And part of that too is, I will say it in as many different ways as I need to. Every time I teach a class, I run into somebody else that does not get the concept I'm trying to get across with one of the hundreds of analogies that I have. And I have to make up another analogy for this person. And that analogy is going to be applicable to somebody else that just doesn't get it. And when you hear it another way, and that helps us as trainers, that makes us better trainers. And so we'll say it as many times as we need to, and we're going to keep repeating the same stuff until you hear it in a way that makes sense in your brain.
Nothing is more exciting for me as a trainer than when a student asks me a question in such a way that I see the foundation of what they've been learning. They ask a question that they couldn't have asked a month ago or 2 months ago because they didn't understand the question was there to begin with. So I get really excited when, wow, you just asked me that, or they're critiquing their fighting and they noticed in the fight that this thing happened. I'm like, you wouldn't have seen that a month ago. We wouldn't even have talked about that. And that's super exciting. So ask those questions. Don't be afraid to give out hypothesis on what's going on and what's not going on, because that starts a dialogue. And dialogue is one of the best things. It allows us to really get to the nut of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of those things, as His Grace Duke Sean said, maybe a person has come to the training session 3 times in the past 6 years, right? So this may be their 3rd time. And for some reason, probably time and experience, when His Grace says it again, the light goes on and they go, I get it now. I get it now, right? And so, again, just like we're trying to show them something physical, is how to accomplish that. We see the light in their eyes, or we see them perform it, and they're like, yes, I've got it. It's the same thing on the mental side, right? I didn't get it, but now I do. Now I understand why that's important, or why I will adopt that and work with it, and then see how it affects my training and my fighting.
Yeah, about 6 years ago, I went down to Trimaris to teach at their Trimaris Duke University, and I did my lecture. And the next year, Sagan went down there and taught his version. And being a trainee of Sagan's, I mean, as far as training methodology, for sure, you would think that having the 2 of us basically go down there and say the same thing 2 years in a row, yeah, it's not the same.
Right.
It is a common dialogue, but the way that he expresses it is going to be different from how I express it. And again, when we're talking about the good and the bad and the ugly of this, Sean says it one way and Sagan says it another way. It's not that either of those is bad, but it's not good for you until one of us says it in however you can take it. Kind of want to wrap up with the bad with the comment that Tristan put in the comments there too, is that the idea of good is raising a student's horizons and giving them things to contemplate, and the bad is trying to impress students with how much and which also kind of segues right into the ugly of it too. The bad of it is going to be trying to, as we've been talking about, how to discern what is good and what is bad. Generally, the bad is going to be something that has a potential for injury, or delays your fighting in some way. And some of that ugly, the idea of trying to impress students with how much those are the things that are going to drive people away, and that's the ugly of it. And some of that smash and bash training methodology, where I'm just going to keep hitting you until you figure it out. That there are people that were successful with that training methodology decades ago. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to do on the Coach's Corner is try to dissolve that notion that is somehow a superior training methodology, because it's not. And it has a greater tendency, especially now, it has a much greater tendency to drive people away than it does to encourage people to greatness.
There's lots of games out there. And Tristan also just brought up a great one about actively or passively discouraging questions. If you're working with somebody and they don't like it when you ask a question, that should be the biggest red flag right there.
Absolutely.
Thank them for their time and
move on.
Walk away, find somebody that wants to talk fighting. If you can't grok it by watching us and how geeky we can get on going down a rabbit hole talking fighting, that's what this is all about. So that's a great one, Tristan.
Yeah. So Sagan, what are some of the things you've seen that have potential to drive people away?
Well, number one, if and this is just the way of the world, right? They ask somebody and somebody says no. They ask the next person and they say no. They go out and they try going to practice and they don't speak up and they're pummeled. There are so many things that drive people away. And which is one of the reasons we encourage people, for for a while, don't go buy any armor or anything. Just wait. Let us, train you up a bit and get you ready to fight. Because unfortunately, over the years, those words have come out of my mouth and people have ignored them, only to sell that armor within like 3 months or 6 months because this sport just wasn't for them. But, again, on the other side of that, though, being a good student trainee, right? Don't get in your own way. Don't overload yourself, right? Be realistic with your goals, right? And know that the answers are out there for you, and in time you'll find them.
Yep. Eli, you have some thoughts on that?
I think they're not at the moment.
Okay. Doctor, you got anything else?
I think, I don't know if it's bad, borderline ugly. I guess it depends on how it affects the people around it. But when you get a trainer, and it could be a student, but they are so focused on the ego of their own ability or technique or system, whatever you want to call it, to the detriment of all others. We've touched on that a bunch, and I think that's just really it. The beautiful thing about our sport is there's so many techniques and there's so many systems and styles. And I go back to Bruce Lee, right? Style separates man. It's all about putting all that together. And you start out working on certain combos and techniques to develop a certain base understanding, but at a certain point, you abandon that or restructure that so it becomes the art, it becomes the flow, it becomes the magic of how a fight evolves, and all of that becomes just sort of gray and natural as your foundation for the sport evolves. And as you get better, you have more questions, and they start to breaking down all those macros to their just base pieces. So there's always something to learn, and don't get stuck with folks that want to stagnate that or tell you that no, this is the only way.
I do have something
Sure, go ahead.
to say. So a lot of what we're talking about has been focused on technique, not really the idea, not really the purpose, which is not, the techniques are a means to an end. And what you're actually trying to do is learn how to control the fight. You learn how to control yourself, learn how to control the situation, learn how to control the fight. And all the techniques are tools for doing that. And a teacher who only focuses on techniques, on doing something a certain, well, that may be where the level the student is at. But if that's all a student ever gets, they have a nice bag of tools, but they don't know how to put them together in a way that can actually create the art. And the analogy I use is somebody who has all the finest woodworking tools in a bag, and they go up to a pile of wood and they dump all the tools out on the pile of wood. They just still have a pile of wood. But an artist takes the right tool at the right time, in the right way, with the right piece of wood, puts it all together and makes art, makes furniture, makes something. And because they're using those. Now, at the beginning level, someone has to learn their body, they have to learn how to move, they have to learn the equipment and the tools and the functionality and the different techniques, the mechanics. But ultimately, I find it useful in teaching to give people an idea of where they're headed. Tell them where they, tell them what you're telling them, tell them, and then tell them what you told them is one approach. But I also like to give people a longer view. This is where it's going, and start training their eyes and mind as you're training their techniques. Have them watch fighting and help them understand what they're seeing so that they understand then, oh, this is the context of these techniques. Doing things in this way controls the situation. Doing things in this other way, it doesn't. And so that's something I think I would caution students to look for. Look for someone who gives you that bigger picture of it while they're teaching you the steps on the path to that.
I think something that ties into that real quick is, instead of just answering the questions and showing the techniques to do the thing, I've learned recently that giving your student a problem to solve. Okay, so you're having a problem doing this, come up with a solution. I'm here. Any question you have, but let you chew on it a little bit, where it's not going to hurt you. You're not going to get pummeled for it. But let's solve that problem and give them an opportunity to stretch their brain. And then, Sean, the only other ugly thing I wanted to talk about, because we've covered a lot of the fighting and kind of how some of the training can be abusive, and that's not good. But I also want to point out that we are able and fortunate to do what we do because it's the community that we have. So fostering that community, even if you're not teaching somebody, if you see somebody standing in a corner, they might just be shy, might be new, they might be a knight from another area that's just trying to figure out how the stuff works. Be part of that community. That's what's so amazing about this society. I can go anywhere and find a place to stay, somebody to chat, stick with, play with, whatever, and it's an amazing thing. So the ugly part of that is when you let somebody show up to a practice and they don't get to interact with you.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I was just thinking about, as far as some of the ugly stuff that can kind of come up, something to caution people about is be wary of someone who is in a position of power, if you will. It's this. I mean, some of what we're talking about is power dynamics, right? Somebody that has the experience and has a reputation to or the assumption that they're going to be the trainer or the coach or what have you. Be cautious of the trainer who is going to tell you what they expect you to provide for them. This is what you're going to do for me, right? This is what I get out of it. Be cautious of that. Because the people you really want to work with, as we have said many times on this show, the people who have the information that you want are dying to give it away to people who are going to do something with it. And they are giving it away for free because the payoff that we get is watching you become successful with the tools that we give you for free. That's my payment. It's not you setting up my tent. It's not about what I'm going to get out of you. It's what the sport is going to get out of both of us. Now, if you end up in a nice square relationship, setting up your tent and fetching water, that might be a different conversation. But be wary of the person that says, "Sure, I'll train you, but this is what you're going to do for me. This is what I get out of it." That's where we get into some of the ugly stuff. Is
I could use some people to set up my tent. I really could. Yeah.
Good.
It's a problem with your squires getting knighted.
They all graduate and all your labor force disappears, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, that's one of those big things that I would say be cautious of. If when you have somebody say, "Sure, I can help you out," for a cost, Sagan.
Well, once again, thank you for being with us. We appreciate the opportunity of you benefiting from what we know and from your questions. We get to benefit from what you know. One of the earlier things that was raised was by my brother Octa, where sometimes students raise questions to us. And by that question, it's a learning opportunity for us. And that's important. That's happened over the years, right? Where somebody asks you something you haven't been asked before, and you have to take a moment to go, oh, yeah, that'll work. And it's one of those times where the roles get reversed just for that minute or two, right? I become the student, right? And it's much appreciated when that occurs. So something I'd like to leave you with is that education plus training equals knowledge. Knowledge plus time equals experience. And experience plus time equals skill and expertise. You cannot rush those. That would be one of those things for you as a student trainee to pay heed to, as well as the TCTs paying heed to it when working with others.
Yeah, I think that also kind of goes back to, you know, that question that Brahma said had earlier about, you know, how do we, you know, what do we do when you know, people say you have to do it this way or you can't do it that way, and you know, as trainers, yeah, we you know, we have the information, right, and we have the knowledge, and the student, while, as Sagan says, the student is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this, right, because we've already done a lot of that work, but at the same time we have the information, and thereby we have the obligation to modify our training methodologies in a way in which we can best communicate with the student. And you know, if you, again, if anything that you're, any situation you run into where you find somebody that says this is the one only way to do it, you're not going to listen to anybody else, you know, those are all things to be wary of. Look for somebody that is going to encourage you to get as much information as you can from as many people as you can. And you know, part of our job is, you know, something else we mentioned on the show a lot is we don't have all the answers. I can't have all the answers, right? But I know the people who do. And if you know, even if I have the answer for you, if you're just not getting it in the way that, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm going to find somebody who is going to say it to you in a way that gets across the same concept. And that's what you're looking for in your trainers, are the people that are going to facilitate your training experience and go out of their way within reason to help your experience. You know, of course, the flip side of that is you got to do your part, right? As Sagan says, you know, the bulk of the work is done by the student. And there's a big difference between something that does not work for you and something that you decided you're not going to do the work for, right? If I give you some information, I expect you to try what I've told you. If that doesn't work for you, I am going to find a solution to you. If you tried it and it just didn't work, you say, I tried to do what you say, just didn't work. Okay, I am going to find something to do. But if you come back to me every 6 months and say, hey, can you help me with my fighting? And I can tell, and believe me, I can tell. We know whether or not you did the work, right? Because it shows in your fighting. And I can tell whether you tried something, you know, or if you're just sitting on your ass for 6 months. If you tried it and it didn't work, I am going to bend over backwards to get across to you the concept that we're looking for, or I'm going to find somebody else who can, or I'm going to find another solution for you. But you have to do the work. You have to do your part. If you were genuinely doing your part and say, hey, I tried it, just didn't work. Okay, let's find something that works, right? That's the kind of experience that you're looking for. And especially as new fighters, don't feel like you have to get into a relationship or get tied into anything, especially somebody that says my way or the highway, right? I'm pretty direct about my training methodology, but at the same time, I'm not the end all be all. If you get somebody that gets tied into a particular thing, and this is my thing, my way or the highway, and that's the way it's going to be, You don't have to do that, especially as a new fighter. It's just so easy for you to get enamored with a particular fighter who may be charismatic in other ways. You're like, oh, I really like this guy, and I kind of want to stick with him. You're not tied into anything. You're not stuck in anything. Do what you need to do to make yourself a better fighter and give yourself the best chances of success. Find those trainers, find that TCT that is genuinely interested in you being a better fighter rather than what you can do for them.
Amen.
All right. Eli, you got any final thoughts? We're getting about quarter till here.
So the just to reiterate, I think one of the things that we're talking about is the necessity for a learner to be active in their own learning, and the necessity for a teacher to approach the situation openly and understanding that they can learn from the situation as well. And so teaching and learning are a collaborative process between the teacher and the learner. If you find yourself as a teacher, as a student, where that is not happening, that's not a productive situation. If you're a learner and you find a teacher who simply wants a one-way flow of information and discourages you from being an active participant in your own learning, that's not a good situation. If you're a teacher and the student is passive and simply wants you to do it for them, that's not a good situation as well. So it takes both parties to be active in the experience for it to be productive.
Octa?
You guys have summed it up pretty good. I mean, for me, I just kind of have a couple of phrases that I always get drawn back to. In this particular instance, it's beginner's mind. The beginner's mind, the possibilities are endless. In the expert's mind, you have very few chances for learning. So even with your teaching, really listen to what you're saying, and listen to what's being asked. That way you make sure you're hearing what's happening in the dialogue and be open to new things. I've learned kind of more in this time of COVID, doing things online and getting to work with people all over the United States and some folks in Lockock, and I've grown as a fighter in the last 6 months, and I can't wait to be able to use it on people and see how I can apply it. So always be open for that.
Yeah, because it's all theory until you actually get to hit somebody with a stick, right?
Exactly. I can't wait for next year. But
can't wait to prove or disprove these theories.
That's right. Prove it all over. But yeah, be an advocate for yourself too. I mean, that's the big part. Just like you would if you were going to a doctor's appointment or you're going to go pay somebody to take a class. Be your own advocate. And as a trainer, be respectful of the people's time that you're working.
Yeah, and I think that's the critical part is being your advocate, and that's especially with this particular episode, kind of addressing the students and the people that don't know any better, because why should they, right? There's no reason for them to come right into this and understand how this whole thing works, right? We especially since this is martial art where we don't teach as a traditional dojo. I mean, every night you run into at practice is pretty much their own dojo, because they've all got different ways of doing it, and there's some good and some bad to that too. It's a lot of traditional martial arts have a system or a program that is I mean, I took Taekwondo for a while, and that was part of the American Taekwondo Association. And there are very specific criteria that they have for leveling up in the different belts. We don't have that, right? But you can go to practice and you can learn from the Octa dojo, and then you can 10 minutes later you learn from the Shan dojo, and where we have it is the good and the bad of what we do there. But be your own advocate. Find the experience that is best for you. That is a system that is kind to your body, that is encouraging to get input from several different sources, and try to set yourself up for success as best you can, and really just, not just being a good fighter, but having a good time doing it too. I mean, feeling like when you go to practice that it is an enjoyable thing. And, oh, by the way, while I was doing this enjoyable thing, I ended up kicking some ass too. So that's kind of the gist of it, I think. So I think we're wrapping up just a little bit here. So I'd like to thank everybody for the questions and the comments in the live feed there. And as always, would like to thank our lovely host and producer, Vesper, who makes the magic happen for us every Friday night.
Thank you all for doing this. It wouldn't happen without you. So, teamwork
we
makes
always
the dream
really
work.
appreciate what you do, keeping us on track and getting these things live going. And as you can see from when I do the Monday night show, when I have to push all the buttons there, I think it's safe to say that I do all right, but I'm no Vesper.
Oh.
That goes without saying.
Yeah. Yeah, we always appreciate what you do for us. Next week on the Coach's Corner, we're kind of continuing this mini series, if you will, of coaching and teaching. And so the next week we have instructing at the next level, understanding the next step and being a good trainer or a good coach for your students. And the thing to understand about this too is this may seem like kind of a top level overview, but this is a conversation for everybody. You never know when you're going to fall into that role of being a coach and being a trainer. You never know when somebody, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show today, that when somebody's going to decide that you're the guy for them. And it's like, this is the person that speaks my language, and so I'm going to listen to this person. And sometimes it just kind of happens. So we'll probably be talking a little bit about training the trainer and that sort of stuff. But that's something that being a coach and being a trainer, it's a natural evolution of your experience. And if you are in an area where you don't have a lot of experience, maybe you don't even have some nights in your area, you may quickly turn into a trainer because somebody's got to. So we'll be having some more discussion on that. We appreciate everybody tuning in as always. We're really happy to have you tuning in every Friday night. We're having a great time doing this, and we're hoping you guys get some good information out of this.
Yeah.
So
All right,
thanks as
everybody.
always, Eli, Octa, Sagan. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So y'all have a good night. And if anybody has any questions that we haven't answered, please feel free to post those over the Coach's Corner. We will definitely get into that. We had a couple of questions pop up this week that are just some really great questions to just throw out there. And every once in a while, somebody puts a question out there and it turns into an episode. Because like I said, we like talking about this stuff. So we're happy to answer your questions. So feel free to keep throwing those out there. So. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us, and have a good night. We will see you next week.
Good night now.
Take care, everybody.
Right.